Next up, we have three very popular and powerful women discussing the reality of today's Indian women. The first speaker is actor, producer, and director Suhasini Maniratnam. We also have Supreme Court lawyer Mihira Sood and author, screenwriter, and advertiser Anuja Chauhan, who is known for her works The Zoya Factor and The Battle for Bitora. The trio is in conversation with another woman, author and senior journalist Kaveri Bamzai.
Mihira, I'll ask you to set the agenda for us because really you know more about all this than any of us do. In theory, it seems we have fairly good laws for Indian women. Although, of course, these days you can't tell with some of the judgments that, are being made. But in practice, we really are still pretty much, backward and regressive, aren't we? What do you say to that, Mihir?
I think that to start with, it's important to unpack some of these laws and where they come from. Because while I think you're right, on paper, India has a plethora of laws, that relate specifically to upliftment of women, protection of women's rights, etc. We have a ministry for women, also combined with ministry for children, but that's a separate topic.
Yeah.
We have institutions like your National Commission and state level commissions for women. So, yes, on paper, it does seem like this is something that really concerns us as a society and concerns our political leaders.
Yeah.
And, with that level of concern having been directed at the issue for so many decades, you'd think that we would be much further ahead than we are today, but that's not the case. And to my mind, part of the problem is that we are, I think, too easily swayed by strong laws. And by strong laws, I mean laws with stringent punishments for various offenses. And we don't really look at what the law is actually doing. So
Right.
I disagree that we have great laws on paper. I think we have strong laws on paper.
Right.
But those laws are just strong in terms of being harsh and penal in nature, but they don't necessarily do anything to actually improve the condition of women. Many of these laws are poorly conceived and really haven't taken the lived realities of the women they are meant to help into account at all. You take for example the sexual harassment law.
Yes.
It might seem, to a non-lawyer, to somebody who doesn't work in this field, that, it's great. We have this really progressive law on sexual harassment at the workplace, and it recognizes not just quid pro quo harassment, but even other forms, which is really progressive. And it has such a broad definition of who is an employee and who is a person who can be harassed and what is the definition of a workplace. So it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But the fact is that you still have a structure where a woman is expected to file a complaint with an in-house committee that has one external member, and the rest of the people on that committee are all senior people within her own organization, who are probably, given the nature of harassment and the hierarchical way in which it normally happens, those people probably have a closer relationship with her harasser than with her.
Exactly.
And probably see him as far more important and indispensable to the organization than her. Why would she even make that complaint? And that's not what, I was part of the Justice Verma committee that was set up in 2012, 2013 to look at these, suggest amendments to criminal law. And one of the things we looked at was sexual harassment laws, because this law was not in place at that time.
Right.
There was a bill in place.
Yeah.
And we looked at that and we said, this is not good enough. There are various problems with it, these structural, disincentives for a woman to take her complaint forward. And what we suggested was something totally different, recognizing that women don't necessarily want to go through the full court and evidentiary, criminal court and police kind of thing. But we suggested something that was kind of a halfway house, a little similar to what you have in the United States, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, which is kind of like a tribunal, not police, not criminal, set up specifically to look at this with some kind of expertise, but external.
Right.
that recommendation was ignored. They went ahead with whatever was already in the bill. So your options are police or
Right.
in-house committee, that is your own organization, seniors. That doesn't work for people.
Right.
You look at, for example, look at female feticide laws. What do they do?
Hmm.
I mean, it's a laudable attempt, and I understand the difficulties with it. But what you're essentially doing is outlawing information and penalizing, information being given during ultrasounds and things like that, and making it extremely difficult also for women to get ultrasounds when they need it, say in emergencies, and you need, various prescriptions and signatures and all of that to go get an ultrasound when you're pregnant. A lot of times women miss getting it in the window when they can legally get an abortion. So what you're doing is actually hampering women's reproductive freedoms. It's a well-intentioned but very ham-fisted law. Look at digital laws. You have the Indecent Representation of Women Act, but it punishes equally women for portraying themselves
Yeah. Yeah, that's
in
right.
an indecent manner, as especially when read with obscenity laws, Information Technology Act, etc. It equally punishes women for portraying themselves or their own sexuality in an explicit manner, as it does anybody else violating their autonomy. So it becomes very clear that the reason we have these laws is because we've taken a very protectionist approach rather than an empowerment oriented one.
Right.
And that, to my mind, is the root of the problem.
Right. I think that's quite a fascinating point, really. This is something that I didn't really look at so closely, but it sounds so reasonable. So, Hasni, you've also worked with a lot of people, especially single women, and you've seen the impact of property laws, unequal property laws, which in theory are equal. Talk a little about this whole dichotomy that it seems so progressive, but perhaps in the implementation it is not so.
I'm dealing in my NGO. Most of the women are maids or cooks
Right.
or
Right.
daily wages people. So we have a branch in somewhere in the rural Tamil Nadu also. So when I go there, like sometimes I meet these women. Once I was asked, Mihira and Anuja, I know you're an expert in law. I come from a family of lawyers, but I have no knowledge of law as such. Once they called me to address about 3,000 women, just to tell them that after 6 o'clock, none of these women can be detained in the police station in case there is a case against their husbands.
Right.
Okay, that is the first time I knew after sunset, women cannot be detained in a police station. But all the women did not know that at all.
Right.
I don't know, so how will they know? So I was really surprised that we have laws like this or rules like this which are not reaching the women at all. So what happens if there is a petty thief and you suspect that he has stolen something from your shop or from your house? What you do is you go bring your wife and bring her to the police station. So that the husband gets scared and surrenders.
Right.
Okay. Can you believe this? This is the country. This is the kind of country that we are living in, where we are still trying to hurt the woman so that the man comes out of his hibernation. So I was quite surprised about that. The other thing is that in my NGO, all the women are from 20 to 40. Okay, 20 to 40. About 90% of the women are all, 99% of the women are all widows. All the husbands, most of them, I'm sorry to say, are alcoholics who kill themselves by drinking or sometimes suicide. Some of them even like threaten to commit suicide to scare the wives, and it actually happens.
Right.
They can't come out of it. So there are cases like that. So I'm not going into that since you're concentrating on the law. But what happens is once the husband dies, the woman is in such a shock, she doesn't know what to do. She doesn't want to be sent out of the house that she's living in. So what happens is usually the mother-in-law, again another woman, or the brother-in-law or the father-in-law takes signatures from her in some papers. Okay. Now she comes back to her NGO and says that house should come to my husband. Since he's dead, after 1 year after his death, they're asking me to go out of the house, and where will I go? So that's when, we bring in the lawyers. And Mihira, that if the husband has not left a will, it goes to the mother. Like I brought lawyers who tell them that if you have signed something, then it is definitely you can't fight for the property for yourself. So
Mm.
all my women want a place to live in, they want a roof above
Right.
them. But it's very complicated because what is there in the law and what comes to them,
Mm.
the equality, when it comes to alimony. I mean, forget alimony. If he's a government servant, okay, we can claim alimony from him saying that, whatever you're earning so much. But if he's working privately, how will you get anything? If my women are divorced,
Mm.
I mean, most of them are not divorced. Husbands have just left them and married somebody else. That's it.
Right.
Okay. And they don't have the energy to go to court because they're scared that the husband or the new wife will come and take the children away. The custody also is a problem. So it is quite a bit of a dichotomy, So with the sad face, we tell them, if you have written something in paper and given it to your in-laws, there's no way you can claim the house that you're living in.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. I mean, let's face all that instead of worrying about sexual harassment and all that. I mean, that is, at least people are aware of what is happening around. So I'm dealing with women who are like constantly coming and asking me, can I have a roof over my head? Why are they asking me to go out of the house that was built for my husband and his family?
Right.
Yeah.
That's really, I mean, the lack of information, the lack of education, that's another problem, the lack of legal education. We'll just come to that again in detail. Anuja, what has your experience been, especially, when it comes to the representation of women? I think Mihira made a very interesting point that women themselves in these digital laws are not allowed to represent their sexuality the way they wish to. What has your experience been, Anuja?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just reeling at all this new information. For me, the understanding was always that our laws are very good
Yeah,
and just not executed properly.
exactly.
That it's always about that the execution is an issue, and people like, even what Suhasini is saying, that people say, don't go, who has the time to go to court, and, and the children, what will happen, and all that. So this is new for me, that even the laws are protectionist, and the laws are sort of like, like infantilizing women and treating them like people who can't think with their own minds and so on. So I guess then it's a two-pronged thing. My thing as essentially nowadays for me, I'm either a parent or an employer, and as a parent, I always feel that I tell my girls, like, go out there and live your best life and don't care about anything. And you have the same deadlines as the boys and the same rules as the boys. And put yourself out there in public media if that's what you want. Be fearless with your political opinions, with your flaunt your body if that's what you want, and if that's what you don't want, don't do it, and be like that. But as a mother, I have no option but to be really, really frightened. As a mother, my instinct is still to say, oh, you're going to Chandni Chowk, please wear like a full salwar kameez. I will still talk like that, that is being the reality of the situation is such. So it's a horrible place to be in. And your heart is in your mouth and you're saying, okay, fine, girls, go out. But then I also have to add all these things about, don't accept house drinks, don't leave your drink unattended, be careful, don't take videos, don't send pictures. So it's a terrible situation.
And you were talking about as an employer, how does that work? Because when a complaint comes to you, how do you deal with it?
Then I think as an, I mean, I just feel again very uninformed. And we are, I'm 50 years old, my generation. These are all very new things for us. A lot of things are things that we did not know when we were younger. We thought that itna to office mein hoga, you don't know whether you're being complimented or you're being harassed. And that line, especially for people in my generation, was extremely blurred. It was, and the men also are as uneducated as we are. And sometimes they just think that they're being sort of chivalrous in a sort of buffoonish way, when actually it's just like it's full on harassment. And girls today are very different from that generation. So again, I think it's a lot of it, at least as an employer, I feel that people are not educated. People don't know what there is definitely a new structure in play that we're trying to bring in. And obviously it's important that it happens at this level as employers, because then it goes down the line to everybody. It starts from here, these people, and there's a trickle down to everyone. But even there, it's very hard to negotiate. It's damn nebulous. And like Maida said, all the people on that committee will have much more in common with the harasser, because he's usually a man and much older and more senior in the organization, other than some young girl who will be judged for things like at parties, these young girls, first jobbers, they can't hold their alcohol, and even young men can't hold their alcohol. But there's a young employee, she's an intern, she's cute, she's having fun, she's not in control. Everybody judges her, everybody gossips about her. An HR thing will probably make a note of that. And it's very difficult. So the onus is on girls all the time. It's on you all the time that you have to be walking, tiptoeing in this very, very narrow path, negotiating, holding onto your character, holding onto your decency, still trying to be a tigress, but eventually knowing you're one paper one only.
That's true. Mihira, let's talk a little about legal education, because that really seems to be the big area of concern. We just don't have enough of that across the board, and across all classes and across genders as well, I suppose. What is the possible solution to that?
I mean, I think there are a lot of attempts. I know, law itself, is becoming so much more popular as an option. There is so much interest, even among non-lawyers. Social media is so full of, spreading aware, or maybe that's just who I follow.
Suddenly, you're absolutely right, Mihira. Law has become very.
But I feel like it's become very trendy.
Very
People
trendy.
want to know. People really want things broken down and explained to them. And so there is. I mean, I do think that at certain in certain echelons there is an increased interest and awareness. I know that even CBSE has introduced legal studies as an optional subject, though I think it should be made a compulsory subject from a younger age. Maybe at the age when you still have compulsory subjects, it should probably be introduced then. At least some basic these things, not obviously not something like hyper technical, but basic fundamental rights,
right,
and basic criminal laws. Especially when talk about laws that are specifically relevant to children, whether it's child abuse or rape laws or things like that. And that's the kind of stuff they need to be aware of. Children do, teenagers do sexually experiment, and they need to be aware that it's legally risky behavior in this country. They even within your own age group. So I mean, I do think there's a lot more effort. I know lots of organizations that impart this kind of education and awareness at a more informal level also. Beyond that, I'm not, but I think it's interesting that all the speakers have touched upon different aspects of, why, we remain, tigresses on paper, whether it's, poor laws, whether it's poor implementation,
right,
because of poor law enforcement, lack of sensitization when it comes to the cops and judiciary, especially the lower judiciary. And as Suhasini was saying, poor awareness.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's actually a three-pronged issue of the quality of laws, the quality of enforcement, and the quality or the level of awareness. So that's, I think, actually a pretty neat way of looking at it. But I think the other thing that Suhasini touched upon is something that I also wanted to talk about, which is when we're talking about, she was talking about how at the levels of society with which, she operates, and the women in those spaces, so many of the issues that we otherwise tend to talk about when it comes to gender equality are so far removed from them because it's basic stuff that they don't have. And I think that that's actually a big problem in lawmaking, because if we get into the reasons why our laws are like this, they may seem great on paper or may not to a more experienced eye, but so sometimes so oblivious to what women really need. I think a lot of it depends on the situation and the circumstances in which the law was passed, because a lot of times it's a knee-jerk reaction to public pressure. We all know that. We've seen that. We've talked about it so much in the last few years with so many, one crime so much public attention, media attention, public pressure, and one law passed with like death penalty or something, and that's it. Like clap your hands, it's all done.
Yeah.
Patriarchy ended. That's what we're expected to believe. So one is that there's no real will or real sort of dedication. It's just an eyewash. That's one of the reasons why so many of our laws are like this. They're just to appease public conscience at a time when it's outraged.
Right.
Another reason sometimes is that there is no real will to change, because the people in power are genuinely uncomfortable with the idea of change. I mean, why is marital rape still an offense?
Yeah.
Right? Because people in power themselves don't want to see that decriminalized. It is too unsettling. It is too destabilizing to their worldview, and that's a charitable way of putting it. But also, I think there's another reason is that there's a complete gap in the experiences of the people who draft these laws.
Yeah.
And the people who they are meant to serve at the lowest levels of society. There's just no knowledge or awareness of what people are experiencing or what their actual problems are. And our lawmakers often think, you put a woman in charge of the committee, or as a member, or you put one woman at the National Commission of Women, or Ministry of Women will always go to, and that's it.
Yeah.
But that's not it, because it's not that, just having a woman there who is, maybe a very privileged, had a very privileged sort of existence and experience is going to understand what the women of this country need. And that's the problem, because you don't even know the problems. How are you going to find the solutions? Because these are not problems for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Hasni, that is an interesting point, the question of privilege. And, we are, of course, all talking from that position of privilege. But in your experience, Hasni, when you work with government organizations, and I'm sure you have interface with the judiciary, with the police, in fact, at the lowest level, and, what have those experiences taught you?
See, there are so many schemes for the women
Yes.
from the state itself. I think some of you would not even know about it.
Right.
For example, there is a widow pension, which is about 1,500 to 2,500 per month, which is given to all the women whose husbands are dead. So we get it for them, and it's not easy.
Right.
So we go there so that 500 rupees is not taken.
Right.
By whoever.
As a bride. Yeah.
I want to narrate another incident to you. There was a girl who was getting married, one of our NGO women's daughter. So one of our coaches, I mean, we call ourselves coaches, not that we know anything, we just want to be nice to those women so that they have a will to live. That is our first aim.
Right.
I mean, if I ask my NGO women, put up your hands, whoever wants to live tomorrow, if I give you a choice of not waking up tomorrow, how many of you will not take it? None of them want to wake up the next day. It's that sad that is why all of us put our time and effort and everything to bring a smile into their faces. So we call ourselves coaches. One of our coaches, she's very well versed in the state government, all the SOPs they're giving for women and all that. She said there is 25,000 grant for single women's children at the time of the wedding. So we had taken, I didn't go, but one of my friends in the coaches, they had taken her to the registrar office, the taluka office, and we were applying for the 25,000 rupees. Of course, you have to go, a couple of times. She got the 25,000. It's not like they stole it or anything, but they gave her the money. When she came, there was another man sitting there, and he asked, "Why are you coming so many times?" And we said that there is a 25,000 grant. So has she got the grant and she's getting it tomorrow? Okay, I'll come tomorrow. He gave 15,000 rupees.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he just gave 15,000 rupees. So she had 40,000. So I guess there are some good souls also. We have good souls like this in the judiciary department. And we do. We bring police women and policemen also to them. And we give them the police women or the men's numbers where they can call if they are harassed, if they are tortured by somebody.
Right.
I wanted to tell you, a normal torture, husbandless woman goes to in her 20s and 30s in a slum area, in a lower middle class area. I'm sure it's happening to us also in our society, but we are not registering it. What we teach them is to get ready, dress up, and go to wherever she's going to work or whatever with a smile. So we've taught them to look good. So when she dresses up and she comes out, the neighbor who's sitting there saying, look at her, she's walking the streets.
Right.
So normal women don't dress up, especially women who've lost their husbands don't dress up like this. So where are you going?
Right.
Who's your customer today?
Right.
And imagine, she's lost everything in her life. And then there is this torture that is going on. So we teach them how to deal with this.
Right.
So I'm just telling you, there are SOPs for people. But at the same time, there was one woman who came to us. There were two of us, and she wanted to meet us alone. And she wanted to talk only to the ladies. So we took her aside and she said, now husband's elder brother came in, and he's like, he's also her uncle, it's all within the marriage,
Right.
within the family. Here, consanguineous marriages are so common in the South. So her own uncle, which is her mother-in-law's younger brother, he is. Okay. So, her mother's younger brother, he is. So and her mother-in-law is her own grandmother.
Right.
So she comes and says, my elder brother-in-law, who's like the head of the family, she's got 2 wives already.
Right.
And he comes and says, you give me one yes, I'm going to throw those 2 women and you can come and live with me. And she says, what have I done wrong?
Yeah.
Did I behave badly with him? I said, for God's sake, there's nothing that you did. And
Don't
she's
blame
crying
him.
and she says, did I give him wrong signals?
Right.
Did I kind of give him any ideas that I'm available to him? Now I think I'm in the wrong. So it takes about half a day for us to convince her, saying what he's doing is terribly, terribly wrong. And she says that he comes only when there is nobody at home and I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So there is no protection for me. So we asked who else can help you. He said, I have a cousin. I don't have a brother, but I have a cousin brother who's protective of me. So he can. So if you tell him what he'll do, he will go and kill him or stab him or whatever.
Right.
So it'll become a family issue. So I don't want anything because things are fine as it is. So I have become a problem in this family.
Right.
Yeah.
See, Mihira, how do you advise somebody like that? So we say, like, bring that cousin of yours and we'll talk to him.
Right.
Okay, we'll talk to him. And we spoke to him and that guy was furious. And we couldn't explain to him that you cannot go and kill that fellow or like make it an open thing. You just have to protect your sister.
Right.
He was taken aback. The tough guy was taken aback. He didn't know how to deal with it. See, we are dealing with things like this. So how do you expect this woman to go and report if the brother-in-law actually sexually harassed her or even raped her?
Yeah. Exactly.
When it comes to family.
Yeah.
And me and my friend, we are sitting there and we are trying to tell her, let's not create a problem in our family.
Yeah.
So how do we do it amicably without any problem?
Right.
So, people like me are coming down, not looking at laws, but wondering how to save a family. Imagine her plight. So how do you expect her to actually take the law into her hands or go and approach somebody legally?
Right. Yeah, it's fascinating. Anuja, I'll just bring you in here. This is an important point that most abuse actually takes place within the family.
Yeah.
That's the starting point. And really, when the woman goes out, that's another question altogether. But so much of the abuse takes place within the family. And this is across classes. I think it has nothing to do with class. It happens across classes. So how do you deal with that? And then I'll come to Mihira for the legal advice, really.
And I think what I'm hearing here is that, the law and what the law puts on is a separate thing. In women's lives, and the lower you go down the social hierarchies, the worse it gets. Everybody is a judge.
Right.
Everybody is judging you. Every single person. You don't need to go to court to be condemned, or probably have a life sentence put on you. It's all done. So every place is a courtroom. Everyone's sitting in a jury and everybody is judging you. That is the reality. And whether in a workplace, it is that, oh my God, my harasser is my boss or my boss's boss or someone important who I can't alienate, or in the home, where, oh my God, my harasser is my grandmother's brother and therefore someone I cannot alienate. So so all the more reason that she should have the backing and, very clearly designed laws in the first place, which Mira can tell us more about.
Yeah. Mehra, what legal advice, as Suhasini said, would you give in such a case?
So I think part of the problem is that we, a lot of times people have an expectation that the law is going to provide an answer to their problem.
Hmm.
Whereas what the law actually does is give you an option if you are in a position to use it.
Right.
Right? We this is something that I've been grappling with, from in general. As feminists, we talk a lot about whether the law is actually useful for us as an institution or is it irrelevant for us. In the context of Me Too, again, there was, the entire question of, well, does the law really serve women? Should women be abiding by, legal niceties and technicalities when the law does nothing for them? And I think one of the things that I do believe is that we need to not rely on the law as a solution for all problems.
Right.
Because what I see here is more of a social problem
Hmm.
where the woman is not empowered enough to exercise any options. It's a problem of, whether it is lack of education or opportunities or financial independence or so I think a lot, and what we see now, I think a lot of our lawmakers take advantage of the fact that as a society we're constantly looking for like legal quick fix options, and that's easier for them than to do the work of actually trying to reform society, which
Yeah.
is going to take so long and which is going to not grab any headlines. So I mean, I just don't agree with the idea that law is the answer to every social problem.
Yeah.
Law has to, and very often that's something that adversely affects people, especially from more oppressed or marginalized communities. The fact that there is so much law, governing every aspect of their lives. So I think part of the problem is us, that we're so keen to see a new law for every problem that crops up. Whereas the only laws that I could see here would be things like right to education,
Yeah.
or affirmative action in hiring policies, or proper maternity benefit, things that would actually empower women from the ground up. Because I don't really know what a law would do in a situation where a person is not willing or in a position to use that law.
Yeah.
Right?
Mehra, may I also bring up your own experience of, dealing with and calling out sexual harassment? What was your experience like, Mehra?
Honestly, so long ago. I think about it sometimes now and just think of what a different person I am today, and how I would have just never ever, tolerated anything like that. But I was so confused back then, because I was so young.
Yeah.
And the legal profession is so incestuous, because you meet in court every day, and if it's you work on one case with one lawyer, and another case you collaborate, you may be on a team of several lawyers, or you may be opposing that lawyer in court the next day. There's no getting away from this person. So it's kind of hard. And honestly, like I feel like I didn't really know which end was up, and it wasn't even it wasn't like any kind of the quid pro quo or anything even explicit. Nothing was ever explicitly said like that. It was just obvious that this person was really, really just had a really, really inappropriate interest just, keep calling or sending flowers, or, it was that kind of thing, which, and I remember even then, when I did speak to a few people while it was happening, and it was like, uh, it was, it was always kind of laughed off. I don't think my generation is that much better than Anuja's when it comes
Yeah,
to,
exactly.
oh, we're all learning now, I guess. But at that time, it was like, oh, he's got a crush on you or something like that. And, I would also like, okay, haha, maybe it's just best to. And so my way of dealing with it at that time was to just try and minimize all contact, or avoid, try to avoid any situation where I am in the same room,
Mm.
or, we're working on something together. Just try to, just avoidance tactics was my, this thing. And I think what I felt more was that, I mean, what really came out for me when I thought about it and wrote about it, which was a few years later, was that, even when people talk about, it's a compliment or it's flattery or anything like that, it's actually really humiliating, because everyone around you can also see it.
Mm.
Everyone thinks that if you're doing well, it's because you're exploiting this interest in you or this relationship at best, and at worst you're actually like sleeping with the guy.
Yeah.
So it's actually really humiliating, because I can see it from their point of view.
Yeah.
It's not at all flattering.
Yeah.
So I think that was something that really then that kind of hit home. The idea that, when people say that something is really, it's a compliment, it's like they have no idea about the world you live in.
Yeah.
And how people are seeing you, and the people you have to interact with on a daily basis, which is not going to be this, 50-year-old guy. It's going to be your peers.
And how they view you.
Yeah.
Anuja, haven't we all been in that situation?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, anytime, I mean, I think that's true for all working women across time, is that
Absolutely.
it's never your smarts that have got you a promotion or have got you, a better designation or a role or a responsibility. There's always some sly talk about how you got it, what the opportunity cost was. Either you're involved with some man in your workplace, or, your children are being completely neglected because you're here. So one way or the other, it is like, have a free helping of guilt and shame every time you do well at work. It's like, wo free mein milta hai.
I just want to add, for years after this, for years, I really suffered from a serious case of imposter syndrome, which is I really genuinely never felt that I had deserved anything I got.
Yeah.
I always kept wondering, why me?
Yeah.
Or somebody's made a mistake.
Yeah.
It's taken me years to get to a position where I feel confident enough to think, I've earned this.
Yeah. And why not me?
Yeah.
That takes you so long to come to. So Hasni, has that been your experience as well? Have you had those experiences?
I guess not so much, but all of us have gone through, like when Mihira says, we kind of identify people who are going to cross the line, we always move away.
Yeah.
So in my film industry also, if there is somebody like that, I prefer not to do a film with them.
Yeah.
I'm not comfortable. But if there is a film, then I have to grit my teeth and do it. There is no other choice. In that way, we had our own actors, ICC. Even the men would want me. If I'm going for a film, men would actually want me, because, we are very close. My heroes, I mean, somewhere we get very close, and then the guy would tell me, you're going to a particular state for a film, be careful, that guy is, you have to be careful with him. It's very sweet. It's not just the women who tell us, the men also say that, be careful, so it's not so bad. I mean, but all
the
of
onus is on you, really, at the end of the day.
It is on you, yes. I just wanted to tell you about a case that, I mean, my experience with the judiciary, Mihira, I'm so sorry to bring this up, but 2004, there is a colleague of mine who did an interview for India Today, which went like crazy, and political parties and everybody, and there were so many cases filed on her and when I came to know, she came home and I said, why aren't you going to the court and, appearing? And she said, they are paying 100 rupees for women to put cow dung on my face. So there are 100 women who are hired to throw cow dung on my face. Wow. So how will I go? So that is when I thought, oh my God, people work against you for no reason at all, just because you're a woman. So I was angry, like, Meera said I was young and I wanted to retaliate. So I'm a lawyer's daughter. My father said, don't be scared of any of these people. So I was not scared. So next week we had a public function and somebody started this topic saying that, this girl is so successful and she's come from a different state and now we are treating her badly. I don't know why. I think it ignited something in me. I was not planning to talk at all. Then I said, she's not my friend, but she's my colleague. And she's treated badly in the state. So I'm saying sorry to her for all the bad behavior of people and whatever happened to her. I'm saying sorry. And I just said that I just finished writing a scene for a film in 1947. India got freedom. It's not just the men who got freedom. Women also got freedom. That was the dialogue for Guru, if you remember right.
Right.
That. So we had just written the dialogue and I was reading it. I said, all of us got freedom to do or say whatever we wanted. So why is there not freedom of expression for women when men can say whatever they want?
Right.
So, you know what happened? The guy who started the dialogue about her, he was spared. There were 18 cases filed
Against you.
Cases against me. And I have to tell you about two judges, Mihira. I'm so sorry to say. This was a woman judge. And she says, I am going to summon her. I want her to come. Who does she think she is? I want her to come and stand in the witness box in my court. What kind of ego is this? See, and the main judge who was in charge of my case, I thought all the magistrate cases are okay. In High Court, it'll be all right. You know who was my judge? You'll be surprised. The one and only notorious judge. He was my judge.
Who's there?
From Tamil Nadu. Yeah,
okay.
I think Mihira knows who he is.
Yeah, I think we all know.
Yeah, I don't want to name him. You know who he is from Tamil Nadu. Like so many cases, so many people, so many people from legal department has filed cases against him. And he says that my lawyer, my counsel is telling him like, that's a different case. This is a different case. Why are you combining both? Leave her alone. My client has nothing to do with her because he wanted me to be free. And then you know what he's saying? In my days, in my school days or college days, we never even looked at women. We never lifted our eyes and looked at women. And these women can't behave so badly.
Right.
So it's not what your client said is my problem. The fact that she's a friend of that woman, which means she deserves to go to prison along with her. See, this is the kind, and he says it openly in court, in front of everybody. My counsel comes back and tells me, what do I do with him? But you know, the case got quashed after 5 years, not 1 or 2 years, after 5 years. So see, when I can't get justice, when a female judge tells me, let her come and stand in my witness box.
Yeah.
So this is the problem of people who are well known.
Yeah.
So imagine people who are not known and people who are like, don't even have every day there'll be a policewoman, she'll cry before she gives me a summon. I'm telling you, every day, every morning, there's a woman who will come, ring the bell. So sorry, madam, this is your summon. No, police women only come and give the summon.
Yeah.
18 summons. And all my friends started telling me, Hasini, you had such a wonderful life without any blemish. This has become a black mark in your career and in your life. Imagine supporting a woman brings you black mark in your life. So what do? And the kind of things that are socially said also.
Yeah.
There is one man from my industry who says, if Suhasini had been my wife, I would have locked her inside the room and thrown the key and lost it.
So
I mean, this is what you get. I mean, today it's worse. Today, the trolling is much worse than how it was in 2004. But this is my one experience with the judiciary, and I was so disillusioned. But you know, finally, Khushbu's case was quashed in the Supreme Court, so I survived.
Right.
Only because of that, I survived.
Right.
5 years of torment and torture.
Mihira, what does one say?
I mean, it goes back to what I was saying, that it's not enough to just, staff these positions with women with zero sort of examination of what is their background, what is their interest in gender issues, are they really suited to this position? You look at, so many institutional positions because, it's the new cottage industry to just set up something or the other for women.
Yeah.
And you just think that, anybody, who is a woman can be put in these positions, and and that's good enough. As if any kind of background in this field, or any interest, or any kind of history of what their views on these issues are is not at all relevant.
Absolutely.
And it's just, as I said, you pointed out, we're all speaking here from a position of privilege.
Yeah.
And that's probably always going to be the case when it comes to people occupying positions of power. But the important thing is, what do you do with that? I mean, are you just going to sit there and draft these laws based on your own understanding, or are you going to use that position to go out, meet people, understand what different sections of society are going through, and kind of use that to educate yourself? Right? There's a lot you can do with the power and the privilege that you have, that people are choosing not to do.
And Mihira, it's very interesting. We have a woman in the Ministry of Women and Child Development, and we've had the lowest allocation in several years for that ministry. So it's absolutely right. And it's also, of course, budgetary allocations are also no marker of exactly how much the ministry spends or how much it does. But yet, just the fact that you have a woman at the head of the ministry and you have one of the lowest allocations in the past few years tells you that it doesn't really matter who's, you have to do a proper check, you have to do a proper background check, you have to understand the problem, and you have to understand who to appoint in that position. Isn't that also one of the, one of the points? These institutions also have sort of declined over a period of time.
I think the comments coming from the women who head these institutions, whether it's on, every time there's, an incident of rape or sexual violence of any kind, there's frequently comments of victim blaming that come from people who head these institutions.
Yeah.
Recently, on the whole Twitter love jihad controversy with the chairperson of the NCW and the things that she was saying about love jihad, which literally militates against the right of women to choose their partner. So I think this is a problem that we in this country tend to have in general, which is to not respect expertise of any kind, because it's not as if any of our ministries are really staffed with people, they're all interchangeable.
Yeah.
As far as governments are concerned. So this is a problem that goes beyond, but I think gender is something that gets even more of a short shrift because it's just seen as lightweight or something, anybody can handle that. It's not something that is seen as requiring any kind of expertise at all.
Right. Anuja, what are your thoughts on this? Because when you look at organizations like NCW or NCPCR, I mean, these organizations that we should turn to for help, but often they end up being headed by, women who are sort of, they might as well be men, I mean, they're as much part of the problem as the men are.
Yes, they are. Patriarchy is wielded best. I mean, the tells us that there's no one more patriarchal than the evil, grandmother-in-law or whoever is at the head of that TV serial. And what I find, the hope I get from these things, I mean, it's so lovely the way, women stand up for each other, like the story Suhasini's just told us. And something like that where, people get together and then they are penalized for doing that. So when women band together, it makes everyone extremely uncomfortable.
Right.
That's why the structures are always put in place to separate
Divide
women, make them into rivals, pit them against each other. In every boardroom, there'll be one token one. And so all the women are fighting to be that one woman instead of fighting, in a love. That is sort of encouraged, and that is sort of active and carried on, and that is why you have this thing where the women who are the most judgmental and harshest and say the cruelest things often are the women that functions. And that's why there's so much paranoia when women get together, say for the sake of the women's reservation bill in Parliament. Anything that women cross party lines to paranoid about that, that they're hanging together, and that starts becoming very dangerous, which is why Me Too was also very dangerous, because girls were banding together, women and girls were exchanging stories, were getting a sense of power and becoming one and fighting. And it's not just in India or in poor India. We've seen it in the US during any, the presidential campaigns that happened with Hillary Clinton or anything else like that. There is fear of women banding together.
Absolutely. Just the last closing comments from all of you. So Hasni, is there one thing that you feel could possibly change things for women? Just one. Where would you like to start if you had the power?
I really don't know. I think it's still in women's hands. I think we have to bring up better sons so that when they sit in positions, they are sensible and sensitive to women's issues. I mean, I have 3 people at home, 3 men who really care about women. That's why I'm in a happy place. So I'm lucky. I wish every household has at least 3 men who are sensitive to women's issues and they will stand by. I just want to give you an example of what my husband said when my mother came back after 28 cases were filed against me. And she said, I haven't slept a wink last night. So I came to my husband and said, my mother tells me that she couldn't sleep last night. Then he asked me, what about Khushbu's mother?
Yeah.
Then she hasn't slept for 30 days.
Yeah.
How are you different? How is your mother better? We want more people like this who will support women, not just at home. Only when they start supporting women at home, they will support them in the society and in judiciary also. That will be I think the sons and the brothers and the sons-in-law, we have to make sure they respect women's issues and look after women.
Yeah. Anuja, just
No,
one.
I completely agree that it is all about bringing up sons who have older sisters, and fathers of daughters. Also, people have great hope in. Fathers of daughters are very much at the front of this as well. So I think, this is something that is not such a courtroom battle as Meera is saying. It is much more social. It's about what happens in our families, how we stand up for all these things, fight the good fight on our WhatsApp groups, with our own family, with our judgy uncles and evil aunts and so on. So it takes everybody working together.
Yeah. Mihira, last word for you, of course.
I think what I would like to see is in terms of laws and policies, really, as not so much like courtroom or punitive laws, but in terms of the kind of policies, I would really like to. I mean, if I had to sum it up in one word, it would be imagination. We should really. I would like to see policies that are made using our imagination, not necessarily feeling like you have to stick to some script of how things have always been done and how they must continue to be done. But whether it's just identify a problem. Think about what it is that could solve this problem, right? Rather than, using really unimaginative, this thing of, okay, you violate this, it's jail. That's not a solution for anybody. The only people that empowers are policemen. And, we would really like them to have a little less control over our lives anyway.
Yes.
So like, for example, okay, so like you have inheritance laws that people get around, now laws say you have to, if a person dies intestate, everything is left to the son and daughter equally, for example.
Yeah.
And people get around that by gifting everything to their son, or, creating a trust. And there's so many legal ways people get around that in their lifetime. So, what do you do when you have a problem where the law is evaded in that manner? Think of a solution. Maybe it's not about punishing something. Maybe you can incentivize or disincentivize, certain kinds of actions. Think along those lines when it's, you have a problem of people not wanting a girl child. Think of ways you can educate and think of why is it that people consider it a burden. Work on that.
Yeah.
Maybe incentivize it. It may not sound, like really kosher to say, but people should want a girl child for who she is and not because of some incentive. You have to get there first.
Yeah.
Right. So I just think that we need to be using a lot more imagination in the way we approach problems. than what we do or what we're known for.
If I had one thing to do, I would make Mihira a minister for women and child development right away.
You've said that before, and this is why I always come on your panels, because I live to hear that, Kaveri.
But I seriously feel that. I think it's so lovely to hear such innovation, you know, and it seems so simple and it seems so logical, but you have to hear Mihira to understand that it is possible. Thank you so much, Mihira Sood, Suhasini Maniratnam, Anuja Chauhan. It was such a pleasure to have you on this panel. I learned so much, and I think all of us did from all our experiences. Thank you very much.